The SNP is unlikely to win overall control in Scotland, but Nicola Sturgeon is heading for an historic fourth term. With the support of the Greens creating a pro-independence majority in Holyrood, what does that mean for another referendum?
Firstly, you're not picking a fight with the SNP, you're picking a fight with the democratic wishes of the Scottish people. And secondly, you will not succeed.
Right now, we need to be focusing on getting out of this pandemic, getting our economy back on its feet again. This is no time to have another divisive referendum.
In Wales, Mark Drakeford equalled Labour's best ever result, even as the party licked its wounds in England. Also on the programme, Julia James's murder investigation. A man in his 20s is arrested. Train cracks, disruption across the network as faults are found in some high-speed trains.
Yes! Great job, guys. That's hard work.
And Lewis Hamilton does it again. The world champion makes it 100 pole positions.
This is ITV News with Romilly Weeks.
Good evening. Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP look set to win an historic fourth term in the Scottish Parliament, but appear short of an outright majority. There is likely to be a pro-independence majority, though, at Holyrood with the backing of the Green Party. And Nicola Sturgeon said tonight that means there'd be no justification for Boris Johnson or anyone in Westminster to block another referendum. But she's certain to meet opposition, with the Prime Minister saying it would be irresponsible and reckless to have one now. With the latest, here's our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith.
The SNP's chances of a one-party majority are getting slimmer with every vote counted. The only certainty so far is Nicola Sturgeon is on course for a big win, and she's already plotting a second independence referendum.
For any Westminster politician who tries to stand in the way of that, I would say two things. Firstly, you're not picking a fight with the SNP, you're picking a fight with the democratic wishes of the Scottish people. And secondly, you will not succeed.
Whether there is an SNP majority here in Holyrood or they're propped up by other pro-independence parties, there's no difference legally or constitutionally. In both outcomes, the Scottish First Minister must ask the UK Prime Minister for powers to hold an independence referendum. And the answer at this stage is still no.
Well, our message to everyone, including Nicola Sturgeon, is that now's not the time to be having another divisive referendum, another bout of constitutional wrangling.
Nicola Sturgeon could be relying on the Scottish Greens in the next Parliament. Their leader told me today he will prop up her government, and he does back her plans for a referendum.
But the longer they simply say to the people of Scotland, you're not allowed to choose your own future, the more they will be pushing the people of Scotland in the direction of insisting on independence.
If the Prime Minister says no, will you support Nicola Sturgeon to go ahead and dare him to stop you in the courts?
Scotland's future should be decided by the people of Scotland, not by Boris Johnson. And I think it's entirely legitimate to put the question of Scotland's future before the people again in a referendum.
After 14 years in government, the Scottish electoral map is once again dominated by the SNP. A victory for Nicola Sturgeon that means the independence question is now hanging over this nation. Peter Smith, ITV News, Glasgow.
So let's take a look at how things stand in the Scottish Parliament right now. With 42 seats left to declare, the SNP have 63, gaining 3, but they'll still finish short of the overall majority they had hoped for. The Conservatives have 12 seats so far, having lost 1. Labour is on 6, down 3. The Lib Dems have 4 and the Greens 2. And in the end, they should have enough to give Holyrood a pro-independence majority. Back to Peter now. Peter, so Nicola Sturgeon won't win an overall majority, as we've been saying. What difference does that make to her chances of getting the second referendum?
Well, because she is going to be propped up once again by the Scottish Greens, we will have a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. The Green Party also supports Nicola Sturgeon's plans, as we've just heard there in the report. And that means that Nicola Sturgeon will be daring the Prime Minister to try and stop not her, but the Scottish Parliament. She'll put legislation in front of the Parliament. It will be passed with support from the Greens. And she's saying if Boris Johnson wants to say no, he'll have to go to the Supreme Court. And while Nicola Sturgeon is disappointed, she is not despondent to fall short of that majority, because her party has actually had a record share of the vote from any party standing in a Scottish election. 48% of people voted for them in the constituencies alone, a huge number. But let's look closer at that 48%, because if this election in Scotland was a kind of de facto referendum on whether Scotland should have another referendum, 48% is not a majority. There's still a huge appetite for it here, but Scotland now has a parliament that has a majority of parliamentarians in favour of a second referendum, but the people are not in favour of it by majority. So Nicola Sturgeon has a lot of people still to convince.
Peter in Glasgow, thank you. Having set out her intention of holding a second independence referendum, the question is how Nicola Sturgeon will go about making it a reality. Our UK editor Paul Brand is in Edinburgh. Paul, what do you expect the SNP's next move to be?
Well, Romilly, the SNP has won the election, but it hasn't yet won the power to hold a second independence referendum. As you've been hearing, that power lies with Westminster. And the official route that they would like to go down is to request what's called a Section 30 order, the permission, in other words, to hold a referendum. But Boris Johnson, the Westminster government, have repeatedly said they will not grant that permission. And so, as Peter's just been explaining, the alternative route is to introduce this law into the Scottish Parliament, taking matters into their own hands, but that is likely to be challenged in the Supreme Court, a challenge that Nicola Sturgeon has said that she would welcome. So we are facing here a constitutional clash, though in all reality it's going to be more of a war of attrition here. There is no rush to a second independence referendum. Nicola Sturgeon wants to get out the other end of the pandemic first, and it also gives her time to build her case. I understand as part of that, the SNP government, the new Scottish government, will be lobbying European governments, asking them to pile on international as well as domestic pressure, though the effectiveness of that is somewhat debatable because other European governments have got their own separatist movements to be concerned about. So at the heart of all this is the issue of a democratic mandate. Does the Scottish government have it, or does the Westminster government have it?
Paul, thank you very much for that. After a bruising day yesterday, there's been some better news for Labour in England and Wales today. Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham were re-elected as mayors in Liverpool and Greater Manchester. And in Wales, the party's matched its best ever election result. They won 30 seats, one short of a majority, but enough to stay in power. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dimon.
It has been a less gloomy day for those in Labour Party red. In Wales, Mark Drakeford stays on as First Minister after they secured half the seats in the Senate.
I think this was at the top end of our expectations, but as the campaign went on and the enthusiasm that we saw on the doorstep for Labour candidates in every part of Wales, I don't think it was beyond what we could have expected.
Labour cannot govern on its own in Wales, but will explore the potential for agreements with other parties. Picking their way through the puddles in Manchester, Andy Burnham and his family were about to hear him re-elected mayor with a huge 67% share of the vote.
Therefore, I declare that Andy Burnham is duly elected as the mayor of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority.
Reward, perhaps, for standing up to Westminster during the pandemic.
Where the government gets it right and treats us fairly, I will work with them. But where they don't, I will challenge them for you as forcefully as I can. Greater Manchester expects nothing less.
And what about this?
I therefore give notice that Dan Norris of the Labour Party is duly elected as the West of England Combined Authority mayor.
In the West of England, Labour actually took a mayoralty from the Conservatives. But it hasn't entirely been Labour's day. Overall, the party has continued to lose council seats, and in the West Midlands a short time ago, Conservative Andy Street was re-elected as mayor.
And we've got no time to waste in addressing some of the underlying issues that have been exposed by the pandemic. And remember, we've got the support of a government and a Prime Minister who firmly believe in levelling up.
Votes are still being counted for the London mayoralty in the same building as the first of the Nightingale hospitals. The pandemic is not over, and many voters are sticking with the politicians who've led them through it. Carl Dinnan, ITV News.
Away from the elections now, and police investigating the murder of PCSO Julia James have arrested a man in his 20s. Ms James was found dead near her home in Snowdown in Kent last week. Today, officers have been searching a house in Aylsham as part of their investigation, and Sangeeta Lal is there for us. Sangeeta, some significant developments today.
Yes, police have been searching this house all day. We've seen forensic teams carrying several items out of the house in plastic bags. We don't know what these items are yet, but they've been sent off for further analysis. Now, we're about a mile from where Julia James's body was found, and today Kent police have confirmed this house is linked to the murder investigation, which has really picked up pace over the past 2 days. The 20-year-old man who was arrested last night at around 9:30 still being questioned by police. No indication yet of whether he lived here or actually what link this property has to the investigation. What we do know is officers arrived early this morning, and many neighbours I've been speaking to tell me they're totally shocked this is happening on their doorstep. They say this is a very close-knit community. Everyone seems to know everyone, yet no one seems to know who lived here or if there were multiple people living here. They just say they often saw the curtains closed. Now, this cordon will remain in place for some time. So too will the police presence here as officers try to find out what happened to PCSO Julia James, who was killed 11 days ago now.
Sangeeta, thanks for that update. Rail passengers have faced major disruption today after cracks were found on a number of high-speed trains. It meant they had to be taken out of service, with Great Western Railway and London North Eastern Railway advising people not to travel. Sam Holder is at London King's Cross Station, where services have been affected. Sam, how worried are they about these cracks?
Romilly, worried enough that 180 trains were pulled from service, causing mass cancellation at stations like this. Now, what the experts say is that the cracks they found this morning on these high-speed trains, on their chassis, multiple ones, aren't inherently dangerous, but the fear is that if they spread and expand, that could be a real safety risk. Hitachi not only makes these trains, they also maintain them, so it's their specialists that have to go and check every carriage on every train on every line. So it is a slow process, which is why at the moment only a handful of trains have been given the green light to return to the tracks. And that's why at the moment, and this is the key part for passengers, particularly on Great Western, which is by far the worst affected network, at the moment neither the rail operators nor Hitachi can say exactly how long it will take until a normal service is resumed.
Sam, thank you for that. Travel industry bosses have urged the government to put more countries on its green list. They've criticised what they see as a cautious approach, with people in England only able to visit 12 destinations from May the 17th without self-isolating. And the cost of travel in the COVID era is putting some people off. Sejal Karia reports.
Portugal is green to go on the government's safe travel list, the only major holiday destination to have made it. With no quarantine on return, bookings here are soaring. But the race to summer sun is leaving some behind, especially the cost of multiple COVID-19 tests now needed for travel.
You prepare yourself financially for holidays, you know what you've got to spend and everything, and so it's now, like I say, almost £1,500 extra. And to be honest, if it was not already booked, I wouldn't be booking a holiday now thinking I've got to spend £1,500 on tests.
And there's fury from the travel industry, who say the green list is too sparse to make any meaningful difference to a sector devastated by the pandemic.
You can't build a recovery on the back of a handful of destinations. It's a lot more cautious, and it's going to be a slower start. And the challenge that presents our members, the travel agents, the tour operators, who haven't really been able to generate any meaningful income over the last 18 months.
Airlines have also expressed disappointment, describing it as a missed opportunity. But public health experts believe the government is on the right track.
Last week we had more cases of COVID-19 globally than we've had at any point in the pandemic. And we're making great progress in the UK, but internationally the situation is very fragile. So as we open up, international travel, and we need to do that extremely cautiously.
How much are variants a concern?
If you were to point to one thing that is causing the greatest concern in the public health community, it is variants.
The government says the lists will be reviewed every 3 weeks. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Just before we go, Lewis Hamilton has made more history in Formula One.
Yes! Great job, guys. That was hard work. Oh, that was hard work.
The 7-times world champion has become the first driver to take 100 pole positions. He did it during qualifying for tomorrow's Spanish Grand Prix. The Mercedes driver pipping rival Max Verstappen by just 0.03 of a second. And that is it. Tom Bradby will have the late news live from Edinburgh at 10:30 with much more analysis on the results in Scotland. Until then, have a very good evening.